Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our 10th anniversary celebration of TCCA. We're excited to recognize all the attendees from all over the world who have registered to be with us today. My name is David Frelke, and I'll be hosting this session along with my co-host Sarah Perez. Hey, Sarah. Before I introduce the presenter, I want to go over a few items with you. First thing, that's the title of this session is called "Technology to Help Our Special Needs Students," Part One. So stay tuned next session, Part Two. This will end promptly at 2:50. Make sure that make sure you exactly have 2:50 so we can get out for our next session. If you have any questions during this presentation, make sure that you go to the chat bar on the right hand side and ask your question, and we will answer your questions towards the end. At 2:40, we'll give a 10-minute warning for the presenters to go ahead and wrap up their presentation and answer any questions that you might have. And at this time, I want to remind you of the secret word later on in the presentation. You need that for your certificate. So right now, I want to introduce Heather MacNeill and Robert MacNeill for our presentation. You're on.
Hello, everybody. As he said, I'm Robert MacNeill. This is my sister, Heather MacNeill.
Hello, hello.
And I just want to start off by saying, like, this is also really weird because we do feed a lot off of the people that are in the thing. So it's real kind of weird for me, at least, because I'm used to interacting with people, and I don't know how bad my jokes are if y'all aren't laughing. And I just am going to assume that y'all are laughing. So this is using technology to help our special needs students and the balancing act. A little bit of background. I am a general teacher. I teach English, language arts.
And again, I'm Heather MacNeill, and I am actually a special education teacher. I teach resource, and I'm also an inclusion for Algebra 1.
And when we thought about this, we said, well, how do we do this? How do we serve these two populations? And we realized that it wasn't just, the kids that are classified as SPED and 504, but, you have your ESL kids and you have just people on every level. So we say special needs students, but we really do mean all students. And especially as we are right now, where everything's gone online, or so much has gone online, special needs or everything. And the online portion is what we're going to be talking about more in part two. So there's a little preview for y'all. So we call it a balancing act because we have to figure out how do we balance everything in the thing. We have to serve two masters. Everything is, and when you deal with special needs students, you're constantly fighting. If you're the special ed teacher, you're fighting the person like me, and if you're a person like me, the general ed teacher, you're usually fighting your SPED teacher, because we both want different things.
And you have to remember that when you are working with, a special ed teacher or with a general ed teacher, you have to be in a partnership. The whole reason why you are successful and the kids become successful is because you're on the same wavelength and you're working together. So it's important to plan together, as well as, once you are meeting not only with your team, whether, but you also want to plan one-on-one with just your teacher, so y'all know how to approach it, because it's very important when somebody comes in, whether it's an AP or somebody that's visiting from district. Once they come into that classroom, they should not be able to tell who's general and who's special ed. So it's important that you're able to have a good partnership and you're able to collaborate, because it is beneficial for all kids that are in that classroom, whether they're special ed, 504, general, or even those gifted and talented students.
So the SPED side, which Heather's going to talk about, is following this IEP.
So every year we meet together as a for the annual ARD, and that is to discuss what type of accommodations, if there's needing for modifications, what is needed to make sure that student is successful in the classroom. And it is important that not only do the general teachers have a say in what is going on in the classroom, but you also want to make sure that the special ed teacher is talking about what they're noticing in the class. So if we need to add more accommodations to that student so they are more successful, do we need to change the program? So if they are, and right now we really see it a lot in the ninth grade because there are 3-star tests that happens in the ninth grade, and we do have some students that are, support facilitated, and they're struggling in the biology. Well, biology is a tested subject, so if they're struggling, they need more of accommodation, so we're able to move them to more of that co-teach where they get more services and they get more of that attention with a special ed teacher. Or if they're a resource and they're actually being pretty successful in a resource class, do they need that much restriction? Can we move them down into a co-teach environment and maybe just be the modification? So it's very important that everybody has a say in what is going into that IEP so that student is in the less restrictive environment and they're able to be successful in the classroom. So you're talking about their success. You're talking about what accommodations. You're looking at their past star scores, you're looking at their current test scores. You're taking all the information that is going on in the classroom and in their just education completely and seeing what is needed in order for them to be successful.
And the other side of that is the general ed, and we're just trying to serve the subject. We we mentioned the STAR test. Our When we pull up those reports, or when the admin pulls up these reports, they see our name on it. And so when it comes to the English test, the biology test, the U.S. history test, the algebra test, the general ed teacher, we're like, well, we have to do it, or our whatever ratings we get a lot of the times has something to do with our testing. And but also it's we spent years studying to teach this subject, and we want to make sure that they come away with the same type of love that we have. If I'm teaching Mark Twain, I want to make sure that this kid leaves loving Mark Twain as much as I love Mark Twain, and things like that. So you have to make these accommodations. Now that's where that partnership comes in. That we sit down and I say, hey, well, I want to teach, I want to teach this piece of literature, and the sped teacher goes, well, okay, well, can we do it in this other way? And that's kind of this, once again, that balancing act.
And you have to remember that the general ed teacher is the content specialist, where the special ed teacher is more of that delivery specialist. That's where our study comes from. And, I have, my brother has degrees in English, but I have degrees in disabilities and counseling. And so that's where my specialty comes into. So that's the reason why it's so important that y'all work together to figure out how do you deliver the content in a way that is accessible for all students in that classroom. So again, I have my certificate is in special education. I also have a generalist certification. So in my years, I've taught all levels, or not all levels, but all subjects. But my specialty is more in math. So I teach the Algebra 1. Prior to education, I was working for the state of Texas for Department of Rehabilitation Services. So I have spent most of my life dealing with people with disabilities, um, and dealing with just special education because I was a student who was special education due to a physical disability. So I've been in their shoes and I know the program, and I'm able to kind of relate to them in some type of way and I've been successful through college since I do have my master's degree. So on the end is once they leave high school, I do know what services that the state can provide post high school and trying to get them helpful, not only if it's not in moving into secondary education like college, but what services that the state can provide with trying to help them find employment.
On the flip side, until I started teaching, I didn't know anything about special education. My degree is in English, British literature, Shakespearean literature. I have a master's degree in the last one of that. I worked for years. I worked for the Department of Defense and with computers, and I've spent most of my life being lazy and trying to figure out easy hacks to make my life even easier. Um, so I try my best to know how to get kids to focus on technology. And that's kind of where this whole thing started. Is she works really hard and I'm really lazy, and we wanted to figure out how to make the two of these things come together. And once again, all balancing act. We have to make sure they learn. And whether it's SPED, GT, any of those things, we have to work. And we always say that if one of us was enough, they wouldn't have two teachers in that classroom. And that is really the thing that we had to take away from this, because there's a little bit of ego involved. Well, let's be honest, there's a lot of ego involved in teaching, because we always want to say that our part is the most important.
So when it comes to when you sit into an art, you want to make sure, like I said earlier, you want to bring up what services are needed to make sure that student is successful in the classroom. And sometimes you want to, when it comes into a lot of services, and this is what I stress a lot of times and what is stressed on my school, is when we are providing services, you want to make sure that the effort is shown in class. If the student is not being successful or is not showing effort, then they don't need to get a whole entire day of extended time, because now they're abusing the privilege of getting that type of service. So we make sure that we put in different things in when it comes to the art, saying, is the effort shown? If it's not shown, they don't need to have that extended time. Also, it's very important to make sure those kids are become advocates themselves. So if it's reading the oral administration, you don't always have to offer it. Make sure that it's something that, hey, can you advocate for yourself and say, hey, do you need this to be read to you? And if they say, oh, I can advocate for myself, then you can say oral admin when requested instead of teacher initiated. Nothing, all the accommodations in high school level does not need to be teacher initiated. The student needs to learn to advocate for themselves, because once they get out of the education system and we're no longer there, they have to learn how to be advocates for themselves. So it's important that we teach them now to be advocates for themselves while they're still in school, and so they can be successful later on. And when we're talking about, and prior to going even into an art, I always sit there and I talk to my general ed teacher and I ask, hey, what do you think? Do you think that these certain accommodations are working? Yes or no? And if there's one that is not, I ask, what do you think we should put in? If they don't know, we kind of talk about it. So we always plan together. Not only is it the lesson, but it's also data collection, but it's also what accommodations are we seeing not being successful and what can we implement. And that's when my perspective comes in, is saying, hey, you know what, I've seen this, what we can try this. And sometimes even before you go into an art, try a couple different accommodations to see what works. So when you go into the art, go ahead and say, you know what, I went ahead and implemented this, it worked, and we were able to put it into the paperwork. So moving forward, they're always receiving that service, and then they're receiving that service for the next 3 years as well. And when you're talking about, remember, eliminating an answer choice, that's an accommodation. It is not a modification. Modification is you changing something around. So just because you're modifying something does not mean you're dumbing it down. You're making sure it is friendly to theirs for that student and their ability to learn. So, taking stuff away, changing something up, it's okay because you're not dumbing it down. You're bringing it to a level that they can understand. So it's okay for us to do that.
And then from the other side, you have to find the things that will help you out the most. And Google Chrome, I think, has been the biggest lifesaver for teaching in the last 10 years because of all the add-ons. You can set up a kid's computer in one computer, and then every time they log in, everything looks the exact same every time, and that is so helpful. And if they find something that they like if you have a kid with Erlands and they have to have a specific overlay, you find the app overlay that works for them the best. You set it up once, and then 4 years later, they're sitting in another teacher's class, and there's no issue. Also, planning is, and Heather was talking about it earlier, that when the two groups plan together, it makes all the difference. Because yes, you get a math teacher to start talking about math things, they're going to talk about math things for a long time. Same with science, same with English. We just love it so much. That's the thing we love to talk about. But when it's like, okay, well, how do we do this? Part of it is, you have to take a little bit of time out of your day to teach your SPED teacher. And it's not to say like, oh, the SPED teacher doesn't know something. It's, well, they don't know it to the level that you do. Everybody in here understands the basics of any subject matters. We all have degrees, but how well do you know the intricacies of something? And you should help your SPED teacher get to a level where they can answer most questions from the kids. So it is that that almost perfect SPED model where the one that every administrator wants to see, that it's the two teachers and you can't really tell which one's which. And getting buy-in from a SPED teacher is so important. Because if y'all aren't working together, you're going to constantly fight, and that's not helping anybody.
And you also have to remember, like, even because, we're human, we always get sick. Somebody comes with a cold, someone has a flu. We're now in a COVID situation where, people are popping up where they're getting positive and they have to be gone for 10 days. Get pregnant and you have a baby and you're gone for months. So you have these different types of situations, and having your SPED teacher be on this kind of like that same level as the general ed teacher, we can step in and teach that class. So if you have to be gone for a day, or you have to be gone for 10 days or for a period of time, we always have that issue of what do we leave for a sub? Because we know, do we trust that sub to deliver the material in a way that we want them so they're still learning and we can continue on and we don't have to backtrack? Well, with having that SPED teacher, having them be on that kind of like that same level, but having that belief that your co-teach, your partner, is going to still deliver that material as effectively as you, that's going to help you make sure you're never behind and you can keep moving forward in all your lessons.
All right, so now we're going to get into the actual balancing act, and we're going to go through each of these issues. And for this session, we're talking about the dealing with the kids in person, and as I said, the next one is dealing with the online reality that we're currently in. So how it's going to kind of work is we're going to breach an issue, and Heather's going to talk about from a SPED perspective what we have to look for, and then I'm going to talk about how from the general education, how then we use that to try to make that the easiest. The first one is speech issues. From a general ed one, this just comes down to compassion. Um, from my point of view, if I see a kid who has a stutter or a speech impediment or anything like that, or even if they're just embarrassed about the way that they speak, I'm an English teacher. Don't call on them to read a huge passage. Or the flip side of that, if they want to do it and you're reading a play, make sure they have a smaller part that has a lot of the small breaks. Help them out. And the thing that I had to get told by a sped teacher one time was to correct everyone the exact same way. So if you don't know how to say a specific word, correct everyone in the exact same way, so you don't make anybody feel bad.
So in English, in math, we always come across these bigger words. And when it comes with speech, you have the stuttering, and you also have articulation, and you have some that are just embarrassed with the way they speak because of their disability. You want to give them time to respond. So just because you have all these kids who raise their hand, if you see one of and there are my sped babies, they're always my babies. If you see one who actually raises their hand and wants to speak up, please call on them, but give them time to get what they're trying to say out. Don't rush them. Don't let any other student rush. This is where classroom management comes into play a lot is, you know, give them the opportunity to respond to a question. Let them think about it, then let them speak. And if they have trouble, don't immediately step in and go ahead and give them the word. Let them try. And if they are, then ask, do you need that little bit of help, or give them a little bit of cues or something to help them reach to where they're able to respond with what they want. And if they are just super struggling, be like, don't worry about it. Be encouraging. Don't ever put them down. And I know we're professionals and we would never do that, but it's more of the other students that we really have to watch and make sure that they don't say something going, oh man, that kid's stupid, don't let him talk. You can't. This classroom management comes into big time. You have to make sure that you eliminate that and let them. And I had a kid when we were doing virtual, he has speech issues, and at first he only wanted to, when we were doing live, he didn't want to be in a live session with the rest of his class. He wanted one just with me because of his speech. And I said, okay, but I finally got him comfortable enough, and he finally learned my teaching ability to where he was now comfortable to be with the rest of his class, and we don't have any issues because I've set that standard. So make sure that the kids, that it's all that classroom management, and allow them that time to respond.
Yeah, the classroom management key is a huge part of it with all of these because kids are mean. Kids are internet mean without the anonymity of the internet. Um, so yeah. After that, we have hearing issues. This is another one that is kind of difficult because a lot of the teachers are getting older. We're definitely not the same age as we were when we started, and our hearing is going. Um, and we all have that teacher like me. If you're going to talk to me, I'm going to turn my left ear towards you so I can hear you better because my right ear has a bunch of hearing damage. But with some of the kids that have it, you have your deaf ed students, you have your hearing loss students, and hearing issues is not the I'm not listening to you issues because that's a whole other issue to say the least. But from a general ed perspective, you just look at it like, okay, this might be I need to position myself closer to that student so I can speak clearer. Um, don't, and then Heather will talk about dealing with some of the more special cases.
So with hearing issues, there's a ton. It's not just your deaf and hard of hearing population, it's also your autistic kids. And autistic kids have, some of them have that sensitivity to hearing, and where they hear a fire alarm, and it hurts them so much that they have to plug their ears. So um it's important that if you identify a student who is like that, please let your administrators know so they can let um, either the diag know, or somebody, or the special education counselor, somebody on that campus knows when we're having a fire drill, so we can immediately remove that student, go ahead and take them outside so they are not directly having to hear that really loud pitch noise. When it comes to your deaf and hard of hearing, please be aware that they do wear hearing aids or cochlear implants. So if you have a greeting and you immediately, first thing you do is slam that door, please give them a cue to that student saying, hey, I got to let you know, when I enter a room, I slam a door. My brother knows, Robert knows that, because that's what he does. And this is his first year of having deaf students. So I had to let him know, please make sure they turn their hearing aid off, or they turn their cochlear off, so they don't get blasted with this really loud noise. So it's being very sensitive with all of that. And also, with you having deaf students, please submit any type of videos you are getting to an interpreter so they can interpret that video, because part of their accommodation is interpreting services, and it's on that IEP. If you don't provide it, you cannot fail that student, because you're now not providing their main type of communication, which is ASL.
So in the comment chat thing, Robin Sherwin, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, just pointed something out that you're absolutely right. We left out visually impaired or blind students, and I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about that, and I don't even begin to know what to say other than Braille. So hopefully, Heather, do you have anything?
So yes, so with your visual impairments, I've worked with blind and visually impaired and blind students before, and it is identifying what type of technology. Also, do they need the big print? Um, if Because I have noticed that I have a student this year. He is struggling with graphing points because of his visual issues. So I am now having to make sure that his graphs are pretty much are bigger, and there are numbers, because he does have issues with that. So I'm able to identify that, and we're able to implement that in the classroom. So make sure you have the big print stuff available. All of that stuff would be on the IEP. Also, if you do have a blind student and they do know Braille, then we can go through Aldine or what your school district, and be able to get that material into Braille. So everything is always going to be in their IEP. We also have magnifying, it's called CCTVs. It's a special kind of kind of like a special kind of computer type thing, where you put a paper underneath and it blows it up. And also, you have your overlays to where you need certain different colors. So if, let's say, you have a PowerPoint and this student needs it have a black background with white font, make sure that you're able to accommodate. But everything, all of that information would be on their IEP for us to follow and implement into the classroom. I hope that answers your question in regards to visual and blind students.
Yeah, like I wish I could say that we had planned that pivot, but we so did not, or else I'd have had something clever to say. Um, Video magnification systems, somebody said. Yes, absolutely. Behavior issues. This is a big one that, as a general teacher, we do, I think, the worst at when it comes to dealing with SPED students. We all know we have our emotional disturbed students and kids that have that behavior issue. And so many times, yes, we did mention the overlay app extension. Um, the behavior, we so many times when I was a younger teacher, I would use my co-teacher as the disciplinarian. We all have been guilty of that. But that's really not the case. The thing that I loved was I learned about the cool down time. That is something that is so helpful. and it can be something that we use with our non-SPED, non-ED kids that is just so easy. Just stepping outside uh, and keeping it real calm and being like, "Hey, so what's going on today?" And that's once again a classroom management thing.
And be sure when it comes to with those students that have behavior issues, they know they have that cool down period. Give them, hey, you have 5 minutes and 5 minutes only. You have no, don't extend it because they will try to take advantage of for that, especially for new teachers who really have not really been exposed to this. They're like, oh, cool down. Even if it's, hey, you can go outside and cool down, they cannot leave that door. Make sure they're right immediately outside your door. They cannot walk around or anything like that. So put in parameters in place when it comes to that cooling off period. Also, with cooling off, have them process it because sometimes they need to figure out how to um, figure out why were they in a wrong, or why are they so upset about this certain situation. So have somebody, have your co-teach go out there with them, talk to them, give them that time to kind of process everything as they're cooling down, because they'll get there and they will figure that out. So but when it gets to extreme, where extreme behavior, definitely you have to pull in your gap teacher. You have to pull in your administrator for those certain circumstances where they are acting out and becoming more physical. Then you bring in those specialists. But if you're able to um, do it within the classroom, give them that cooling off period, give them time to process, and get them back into the class. But usually 5 minutes max is what we always say.
And then, of course, we have the learning issues, and this is a huge variety of things when it comes to that. Um, this I always look at it as kind of a just knowing your kids, knowing those students, figuring out what each kid needs. And as we said throughout this whole thing, it's a huge balancing act. How do we balance, making sure we're able to cover everything while meeting the IEPs, but not just their IEPs. Like, what if it's just somebody that just needs that? We all have that C and D student that wants to be a B student or wants to be an A student. Um, and so from a general ed perspective, it's okay. Well, let me show you a website you can go to. Let me show you this thing. Let me show you how to search for that extra information and to do that. And that can just be rolled up into your lesson. And then, of course, from a SPED point of view.
So when it comes with your learning disabilities, everything again is always in your IEP, but you have those that are, support facilitated. They just may have a learning disability in reading or math, or you have those that are your intellectually disabled and they're in a resource class or SLC class. So you have to figure out, it's all kind of playing kind of more trial and error. And as you get to know those kids, because I don't know about y'all, but this year I was scared with going virtual and not meeting these kids and having to provide accommodations, not knowing who these kids are. My brother is a little bit easier because I've taught those kids that he's getting, and I'm able to kind of give him some kind of like helpful, because I teach ninth grade, he teach 11th grade. So I've know those kids. But when I first meet them, and especially this year, I was like, oh, how am I supposed to provide these accommodations when I don't know them? But I went in, I looked at their IEP. When I got access to their information during the summer, I downloaded it, I learned, and I figured it out. And as the year goes on, I keep trying different things. So, do this student needs advanced notes? If they do, give it to them. It may not be on their IEP, but if you notice that it's something that works for that child, give it to them and go into ARD saying, hey, go ahead and put that they need a copy of notes prior to the lesson. So just play, see what's going on, and see what's best for that child, because you can't provide the same accommodation for every single kid because they're all different. The way they learn is different. So you have to make sure everything is individualized for these kids.
Absolutely. And with what she was saying, yes, she helps me out a lot with, 2 years removed. But the same thing can be done with anybody. You see, oh, this person was at this school last year. Okay, let me email out to the sped teacher from that previous year, see if I can get a little bit of information on that kid. And it's one of the beauties that we can have with what we have with this modern day technology. It's so easy to send an email to somebody, and because you can see who wrote their who was part of their sped team last year. Say, okay, well, what can you tell me about this kid? And not that you should go in and prejudge a kid. Of course, you should never do that. But when it comes to some of these kids, like, oh, this kid has a trigger about this. Oh, I should definitely know that before they ever step in my classroom. The next issues we kind of put together, and that's hidden versus visible issues. This one means a lot to me because it's that there's some disabilities that you can see. If you see a guy or a student that's on crutches, you say that guy has a mobile ability or disability. He's having some issues walking around. But we have so many kids that have mental health issues. We have so many kids that have, internal issues. You know, something as simple as, don't give the kid with a lactose intolerant a cheese pizza party. That's not a good idea as for their reward. And so and once again, it comes down to knowing your kids. So yes, it's really easy to see the kid with the hearing aid and go, okay, that kid, I need to, to cue something. But the kid that, didn't have breakfast this morning because their parents can't afford it, and they got late to school, and so they didn't get the breakfast that the school provides. Maybe that they're hungry because there's something else going on. The secret word is empower with a capital E. That's nice.
So when it comes with the hidden and the visual, so again, visual, crutches, wheelchair, if they have a limp, something like that, you can see. You even can see some of these kids that come into our classrooms that may have Down syndrome. They have those features that are visual, but those that have like the anxiety, the PTSD, because Robert has experienced a child who was dealt with a school shooting, and they were going over something in that class and it triggered her. So having that open dialogue with the student is very important, so we know, hey, this student experienced something. We have to make sure that we avoid it, or if we're going into that lesson, give them something else to do, um, so we can avoid that. So Robert has a hidden disability. I have a hidden disability. I have a chronic pain disorder. You can never tell that I'm in pain. I'm in pain 24/7, but it's something I've dealt with. I know I can hide it, but there are things I need, and it's same thing with Robert. There's certain things that he needs and he has to avoid too. So it's being aware, being able, having that relationship with that student, building that rapport is so important. So because paper can only tell you so much, but that student tells you a lot more. And if that student doesn't want to talk, then even if it's going and saying, why is the student always sleeping? Calling home, it could be that student had to change a medication, and that's the reason why they're sleeping in class. And because their body's not used to the medication yet and they're still trying to adjust. So be open and be willing to work with each student, because you don't know what's going on until they tell you, or somebody from their home or somebody at school tells you what's going on. So be open.
Now, the flip side of that sleeping conversation, the sped teacher is always going to, oh, are they on a new medication? Are they on this, on this? The general ed teacher or the skeptical teacher is going to be like, well, did he spend all night playing a video game? Is that why he's sleeping in my class? And both of those two things can be true at the same time. Maybe they are on new medication and playing a video game all night. They both could be true. And you got to figure out, we have somebody new. Hello.
We're just going to remind you, this is your 10-minute warning, and the audience secret word is empower with a capital E. So try to wrap up your session. If there's any questions you'd like to answer, if Sarah has any questions, when you're ready, just ask Sarah for the questions.
Okay.
Okay. So the last, Heather's been talking a lot about advocacy. It's so important to get your students to start advocating for themselves, and especially when it comes down to testing, because there's so many times that yes, we try our best during state testing to get people to have everything they need, but they sometimes there are situations where they can't have that, and they need to know that they have rights and they can stand up for themselves.
So we've has, we've tried to advocate. We're trying to get a lot of the kids, especially special ed, to take the test on the computer. Some students are not good at testing on the computer. They rather have pen and paper or pencil and paper. And if those are one of those students for testing for STAR, they say, you know what, I actually do better with paper and pencil. Let them do paper and pencil. Don't push do it on the computer, because this is something that they advocated for themselves, and you have to um, accept their voice. Because if you don't accept their voice, then they're gonna feel like moving on. Whatever I say doesn't matter, and you don't want them. You want to set them up for success, especially with a person with any type of disability. They already have enough on going against them. They don't need somebody to not believe them.
All right. So, are there any questions?
There was a question about overlay apps and extensions, if you had any examples of one that you would use in your classroom.
I've used Immersive Reader. That one's really good. The other ones, the best ones that I would say for apps for Google Chrome is type into Google Chrome extension and then the issue.
So like dyslexia. Dyslexia is a big one.
Put that in there, and there are 12 apps that will work that are available, and then you just find the ones that speak that works best for the kids. So like, I wish I could say like, oh yes, the one that I personally use is Immersive Reader. I think it works great. That being said, I have had kids that it didn't work well for, so I've had to use it was like, there was one a few years ago that it was Erlin specific, and I was like, oh okay, and we found one. It was like the Erlin Reader, and I was like, oh okay, and we found that that's the one that worked for the kids. So it's much like everything else; it's a trial and error. And while that does kind of get on the kids, kind of annoyed that it takes so long, it's just that's the unfortunate part about it. That's why starting it so young and getting them used to something is so important.
And even because we're now in virtual, for those that are dyslexic and they need a certain color overlay, if you put the background color as that overlay with that black print, that will help with the dyslexia. So just kind of a little hint for y'all to, when it comes to PowerPoint, try not to make it so your background so busy. Try to come with like one color, because it is a very big distraction for them when you have a lot of stuff going on in the background and they cannot focus on the print. So pick a color, but for those that have dyslexia and their overlay is teal, try to find a teal color with that black print, and that will work really well with to replace that overlay.
Fantastic. You guys have some awesome comments and in the chat box over here in the comment section about building relationships. You guys have talked about building those relationships and keeping those open lines of communication amongst coworkers and as well with parents, and for all of us as educators to be advocates for our children with special needs. So great job.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for your time and preparation and sharing your experience with us. The attendees, remember that the super secret word is empower with a capital E. And you're doing part 2 next hour at 3 o'clock. So anybody that's interested in coming back and seeing part 2, come on back and watch these 2 people here that know a lot about special ed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.